Let's talk about the latest developments here on the war. Let's bring in Dr. Hannah Kassab, an assistant professor of political science and security studies at East Carolina University. Thank you so much, as always, for taking the time to join us here and break down some of the latest developments.
Thank you.
So first off, just based on the information that we have seen, we know Hamas's leader is there in Egypt. We also know that Israeli officials are meeting with the CIA and with Qatari officials. Does it seem like a ceasefire is getting closer and closer?
It seems that will be the case. We had the president saying that yesterday, the president of Israel. Netanyahu has enormous pressure on him to bring the hostages home. And sometimes force may lead to the death of the hostages. And so those 3 hostages that died in an attempt by the IDF to rescue them, that signals the great difficulty, of freeing the hostages in that way. So the enormous pressure that the Netanyahu government is facing right now means that I believe a ceasefire would be in the best interest at this point.
And I do want to go a little bit deeper into some of those comments that were made, because Israel's president is saying that he's open to another truce, another ceasefire. But do his thoughts really factor into the decision making? Is it really up to Netanyahu what happens? Who actually has the ultimate say on all of this?
I believe it's Netanyahu and his government. So the government will give him advice, and Netanyahu will make that decision, that determination, and he's feeling enormous pressure. Even though that the president doesn't have much power, he's a figurehead, he still has enormous sway over public opinion and over inevitably the prime minister Netanyahu. So essentially, it's up to Netanyahu, and I believe that decision could possibly be made in the next hour or so.
So we have France, the UK, and Germany that have joined these global calls for a ceasefire. Is that significant in any way, or is that kind of what would be expected?
It's altogether expected. I mean, the global community, international community, they just really want everything to settle down, and they want there to be peace, and they're worried about the civilians in Gaza. So there's going to be this need to back a ceasefire going forward, but they understand the danger of Hamas. They understand what's going on with the Houthis, with the Red Sea, with Hezbollah on the northern border of Israel, and they understand that the world is changing, and so signaling this need for a ceasefire is altogether expected by the 3 middle powers in the system.
We know that now the UN Security Council, they're expected to meet right now to go over a vote here for that ceasefire in Gaza. That vote has been postponed 2 different times this week, and we know that earlier on this month, the U.S. actually vetoed the UN's decision. Is there any world here where the U.S. actually approves a ceasefire or even abstains from voting altogether?
It's really hard to say if they're going to change from last time. Last time they voted no, and so it's really difficult to say whether or not they're going to jump on this vote and say yes, or they might abstain. It's really difficult. But at this point in time, the UN is just, doesn't really have that much power anymore. It just signals like the international community and their opinion, but whether or not this vote goes through, I don't think it would have any bearing on the overall situation, because ultimately Israel has a job to do, and that's to make their country secure. And so altogether, the ceasefire may pause for a moment, but the job still needs to get done.
When you're talking about a possible ceasefire and these deals and these discussions are underway, are we really talking about a temporary ceasefire or a permanent one? Because Hamas seems to want a permanent one, whereas Israel seems to really want a temporary one.
So I've studied this situation for a very long time. I understand that Hamas, even though a lot of people in the media call them a militant group, it's a terrorist group and it's a death cult. And so if you take that assumption, then why would Israel allow Hamas to continue existing? And so I don't think this ceasefire is going to be temporary, and I believe Israel still has a job to do, and that is to remove Hamas. But they also have to set up a sort of government, whether or not it's going to be with Fatah or with Saudi Arabia or with other countries coming in to help coordinate and govern the territory. I really don't know. It's too early to tell. But Hamas, I think the aim of Israel right now is to destroy Hamas. If they were to somehow not, then this would signal a huge failure, humiliation, and weakness. And I don't think that is acceptable at this point in time.
And it is important, as you mentioned there, that the U.S. has labeled Hamas as a terrorist organization. It is important to point that out there. Dr. Hana Kassab, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. Anything else you want to add before I let you go?
Well, there's one thing I want viewers to note is that the international system is changing. And so what's happening in the Middle East right now is just one major change led by Iran, possibly. I think most likely. Russia is trying to change the status quo in Eastern Europe, and we're seeing China becoming more aggressive in the Philippines and in China. So if there's and in Taiwan. And so if there's anything I want the viewers to take away, is that the United States really needs to understand the changing nature of the system and adapt to it as best as it can.
All right. Thank you again for taking the time to join us. As always, we appreciate it, and we appreciate your insight into all of these topics as the developments do just keep happening. Thank you again.
Thank you.